All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004. That's Mobile APIs and Frameworks in the summer 2024 semester at Georgian, and it's week 4, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. And the last part we try to do is put this up to render, and finally finished. This is what it kind of looks like. So there's build successful, and then we were stuck here with deploying, and like I told you, it does it whenever it can, best effort. So here it says using Node version 20.12.2, that's the default. Wait a minute, my version's not that, right? If you look back at my version that I'm using, if I go to my package.json, then you can see here that I'm using a Node version that, well, it's not specified, is it? You could specify the Node version you kind of put together. You can put together engines, and under engines, Node, and then the version. If you don't specify, it's going to pick the default. So for me, what do I have running under the hood locally? I mean, it won't make a big difference, but if I do something like node -- version, like this, you can see that my version is 22.10, right? So that is a different version than what we got online. And the question you might ask is it necessary? Do I care? The answer is no. Unless it's drastically different, or there's features that you want, that you have. If you test it online, and if you see that, for example, render only offers 20.12.2, then sometimes what we want to do is step down. You can use MVM to step down to this if we need to, right? We're not doing that right now because it seems like there's no problems. Using Bun version 1.10, that's its own internal stuff. It says running yarn start, and whatever, and it also says no open ports detected, continuing to stand, docs unspecifying port here, right? And it says connected to MongoDB Atlas, and it says your service is live. That's all the stuff it says so far. Okay, so this is what you should have when you deploy. It also says get/404, and the reason why I did this is because this is like me running NodeMon. Of course I'm going to have a 404, because if I go to my web service, let's take a look there. If I click on this, so control click, and open my web service, then we should see this, just like we normally see. So this is live on render. You should be able to see this now too. And if I do /API, then we should expect to see data. If you've got to this point, you've got most of what I want for your in-class exercise 4, because this part is important. This is like being live on render. This is how you would do it for assignment 1. Okay? So assignment 1, my expectation is you don't need more than one repo, just one, because you don't have multiple assignments, only one assignment, assignment 1. That's why I'm telling you, make a special repo just for assignment 1, another one for assignment 2, and so on. And what you can do is you can point that repo to render, and then when you update, every time you update, it's going to put it up. One thing that's going to happen is that render is actually watching this repository. So when this repository changes, this one right here, it automatically redeploys and rebuilds. Okay, rebuilds, redeploys. So be aware of that. Any changes I make to my API site now, my API render thing here, it changes. Okay. Really good news about this site is by default it gives you an SSL certificate. So it is a safe site. It's HTTPS compliant. No, that's really, really good by default. It uses something called Let's Encrypt, which is a free SSL certificate that it uses. Okay, that's what it does right here. So that's why it's really, really good. Now the great thing is, not only did I connect to render up online, but my render connected to MongoDB, right? And why? Because we put in that environment variable. Let's take a look at that again. So on render, now I can go to dashboard, right? And on render, I'll see deployed from my site. Here's my site. I can always go here and go to settings, okay? Settings. And down in here, you can see that this is the name of my site, right? And this is the place. It's a free service. I can always update this to change it, pay for it if I want to. I'm not going to do that. Your repository that it's pointing to, this is important. The branch, the root directory, if there's any, right? So it says defaults to repository root. When you specify a root directory, this is different from your repository directory. Render runs all your commands in the specified directory. Now, so we could have used our in-class exercise 4. We could have, right? However, it's finicky. Okay, I found that this works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, and I'm not really happy with what it does here. instead of running inside of like, so if I had, let's say, I wanted to run an in-class exercise 4, I could specify that here, right? And then sometimes it works and sometimes I get some really funny, weird build errors. That's why I didn't do that. Build filters. If you want to do that, you can say included paths in here. We're not going to talk about that. Build command, which is yarn. That's the build command we're using because I'm using yarn, not npm. Yarn start is the start command, right? Auto deploy, yes. And what this does is every time the repository changes, it auto deploys. If I have a deployment hook, what is it? It's this, right? That's my deployment hook. And this deployment hook is something we can connect to as well. Later on, we'll talk about hooks, right? So custom domain. If I have a custom domain, if I want to make this happen, I can buy a custom domain for something like Namecheap or register.com or GoDaddy, and then I can have it point to this. And you can configure GoDaddy to use Let's Encrypt, and it will actually, or any one of those services, and it'll point to the render, render.com, and you'll have HTTPS, out of the box without paying for an SSL certificate or anything else like that, which is pretty cool. PR, so pull request reviews, so far it's disabled. I can edit it and enable it. That's okay. Enable to automatically create a preview URL for every new pull request created on this branch. Okay, we don't have that right now, so it's off. Service notifications, preview environment notifications, health checks. These are all things that we have here that are built in for settings. The other thing we can look at is logs. This is an important thing to look at here as well. And you can see the logs of what's happening. There's where I got API 200 because I sent a status code of 200 to the server telling it that it's okay, right? A 404 again is file not found, and it's looking for a favicon when I go there, but of course I don't have anything that's there. So that's our log, and it'll keep track of all the logs in here. All right, so any kind of issues or anything like that, it'll be here. All right, so stuff like if there's a memory leak or anything else like that, it'll be here. Notice also it says detected service running on port 10,000, and it says you can specify a port using these docs if you want to specify a specific port. We're not specifying any port. We'll let render specify the port because we don't care. It's not important. All right, but if sometimes it is important and you can specify what it's going to be, that's basically the logs, disks. If there's we can enable disk access, and it says disks are not supported for free instance types. Upgrading to the starter instance, $7 per month, also includes 0 downtime, web shell and SSH access, persistent disks, one-off jobs, and scaling. We don't need to do this, so we're going to say no. So that's disks, and then we have environment. There's environment, and then we have our environment variable. Look, it's right here. That's the first environment variable we had there. Right, and if I hover over it, it'll actually give you the code for that. You can also copy it from here, right? So I can copy it or delete it. I can do that as well. And I can add as many environment variables as I want, or create a group where it can kind of like, it creates almost like a structure for my environment variables. There's also secret files, right? Now it says store plain text files containing secret data, such as a .env here. So if I wanted to add a secret file in here instead of my environment variable, you can do that directly as well, right? And other things it has here. You can do here's the shell, where if I want to get shell access, it says, hey, you can't do shell access until you use, starter. Sorry, you have to pay $7 a month. So that's something that you can't do. Previews, it says pull request previews are here. Jobs, metrics. Metrics are neat, because they talk about kind of like your bandwidth over the last 12 hours. Scaling, okay, so that's, again, you can't really scale unless you pay for it. You can turn things off and turn things on. You can increase the performance as you get more users and so on. And that's really it at the end of the day. It's really straightforward. It's not that difficult. And that's why I prefer Render for learning, because I think it's kind of easy and it's free. One thing we did was what we did here, we did an auto deploy. And what sometimes we have to do is a manual deploy. See, there's a manual deploy button. And what that does, you can actually deploy again from the latest commit. You can specify a commit to point to. You can clear build cache and deploy again. Sometimes that's important. Or just restart the service. Like if your service crashes, which ours might, by the way, you can just restart the service manually here as well. You can also connect it to, right now, there's IP addresses that it's connecting to, as an example, and these outbound addresses are the addresses that are specific for this particular service. So instead of using the API link, you can use that instead. Questions around your API and how to deploy to render? Any questions? Remember that this is required for both in-class exercise 4 and your assignment 1. Okay, so that's what's required. So we're up on render. Okay, great. But now let's get back to work. Let's get back to work. We said that we're not just gonna, kind of create the stuff on render, but we're also going to be completing our API CRUD functionality. We did this last week. Let's add the next piece, which is let's find, display a movie list by ID. Okay. So in order for us to do that, we're going to go back to VS Code, and I'm just going to point to in-class exercise 4 now, right? So back to this, and here's in-class exercise 4. I want to work with it first, and this is a good place to work with it. And when we're done, we can push this over to our API repo, and we'll push this up online. And why is it really good to do this? Because you can test locally and then deploy remotely, okay, later on. So here's what I want to do. So I'm going to drag and drop ICE4 in here. There we go. So now this is where we're going to start departing from what we did, right? So ICE4 is going to be different than, your other project that we just did, the API project. So please keep that in mind. There's two different things here that we're doing. So what we want to do here is I want to go to server, right? And again, just like before, because we're starting a brand new thing again, I recommend clearing everything up, going to this first command, and then doing your TSC-W, right? And then the TSC-W does your compilation start. We're actually going to do some work here. And then we're going to run nodemon. Here's nodemon. So we're running that here locally. This is our testing suite that we're kind of putting together. This is all the same stuff we do every single time. And then once nodemon is running and connected to MongoDB Atlas, now we're ready to go. Okay? So I'm just going to go to our next piece. So right now, from a controller's perspective, like we said, we only have this one controller, and we have some documentation here that is something that I want you guys to do, document your API. So that your API here, what it says here, is something that we can actually use when we put together our documentation for up on GitHub, which is something that we can do as well. Okay? I don't need to see my .m file right now, so we can kind of hide that. And what I want to do is start thinking about the next function. So the next function is going to be, let's export function. And we're going to call this display movie by ID. All right, so display movie by ID. Okay, we're still going to take a request response and next function. So request response and next, which is the next function. I'm just going to kind of pull this over here so we can see in real time. It is going to return void. We don't need to return anything here. And what I want to do is I want to do what it kind of said there. So this is the first thing. So see where it says let ID equal to request.params.id. Okay, so, okay, to you, what does this mean? What am I doing here? I'm getting a request, the request object. Here's the request object. I'm looking at the params. This is the parameters. And I'm looking for the ID of the parameters. Okay, that's what I'm looking at. Now remember, I'm setting it up so that the link, the endpoint, right, should be, what should it be, right? And it actually tells you movie display ID, right? This could be one way we're doing it, but actually our endpoint is going to look like this, more like API, right? And then ID. That's what it's going to look like, my friends, just like this, API ID. So if I put in an ID here, just the ID by itself, right? Then that's what it might look like. It might just, like, if I push it, if I just ask for an ID, like by itself, or a slash by itself, as an example, just API slash, which is this, right? Then I'm going to get the full movie list. If I ask slash and then colon ID, then I'm going to get this ID. By the way, you can call this whatever you want when we make the root, We haven't made the root yet. And if you call this Tom, then this would be recparams.tom. Whatever you call this, you can call this whatever you like, the movie ID, right? Once we have this, here's the problem. What if the user gives us an ID that's messed up? It's not really an ID. And the ID is not our ID. No. The ID is the ID of MongoDB Atlas. That's that stuff, that kind of stuff. The ID that we get from them. So it's going to be a long number, right? Where would we get this? Well, I want you to think about the use case, right? If I'm going to get one movie, right? Maybe on the user interface. So I want to return by ID. So again, I'm going to do something like movie. Actually, it did it for me. Movie.find by ID, right? And then what I want to do is then, this is important. Then I'm going to pass the data. So then data, right? And it's going to say res.status200. So I'm going to return status200. That's my response object. JSON, I'm going to say success is true. The message is going to be movie list retrieved and displayed. Now retrieved I spelled wrong. Let's do this properly. Retrieved, right? It's not movie list. It's like movie, movie retrieved and display, by ID. And then the data is going to be the thing that I found, whatever that movie is. What if I don't find that movie? What is it going to return? Right? That's another thing we have to think about. What if the movie's not found, right? If we find by ID. And so what about if it's a catch? So we can say catch, what we're saying is that catch only catches errors. It doesn't say like if it's not found, right? So this does something, this returns something. And if you hover over it, it says we have to pass in the ID of the movie, right? And then the ID is an object ID. That's what it's looking for. It says it right here, right? So it says the ID should be an object ID. That's what it should be, right? It finds a single document by its ID field, _ID, right? And then find by ID is almost equivalent to find one. Okay, that's what it kind of finds. So what did I say here on my PowerPoint? Well, here I'm using find, and then what I did was find by ID, but instead of putting the ID in here, this is what I did differently. I said, we want to filter by the ID that I'm looking for. If I just pass in ID, see, this is where Copilot's wrong, right? It's going to fail, right? So let's go back here and do it. So if I say something like, yes, this is the ID, but we want to wrap this inside of an object, right? So the object ID is what we want to look for, which is ID, and then the ID is this. That's the ID. So ID _ID is the object ID of MongoDB Atlas, right? That's the one it gives you. And ID is the ID that we get from the request parameters. That's where that comes from. So if I hover over ID, it's of type string. So it means we're passing this as a string. That's what goes here, TypeScript. And then find by ID, if it returns anything, it says finds a single document. Okay, that's what it does. And it says it's almost equivalent to find one. Okay. If you want to query by a document's ID, use find by ID instead of find one, right? And that's why we're doing find by ID. Okay. So let's say, we're actually retrieving one movie, so one movie retrieved and displayed, and we have to put in the ID of the movie we're retrieving, okay? What does the route look like? So now we've done the controller. Let's put this up on GitHub, right? So again, we're testing locally, and I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna say git add dot, git commit -m, we'll say added, find, the get movie by ID. Is that what we call it? We call it display movie by ID. Display movie by ID controller. That's what we did, right? Now I can push it here to GitHub, no problem. I'm going to wait. I can push a bunch to GitHub all together if I want to. As long as I make a commit, I can pass it to GitHub later. Next, now that we've got this, what I want to do is under our routes, here's our routes. We don't have to do anything in models because we don't have that, but our routes change now because now this gets a movie list, right? But now we want to have another thing that gets it by ID. Now take a look at this. I'm going to do a router.get, and notice it kind of knows what I want, right? And this is kind of what I'm looking for, display by ID, display movie by ID. And the quick fix, if I was to type it like this, the quick fix it says there's no quick fix. Of course, that's not true, right? I want to display movie by ID, and I can just import it here manually. So I can say kind of display movie by ID. There we go. And then now this takes care of this problem. So now this is using display movie by ID. It's inside my movie controllers, and this is where it's we've just created a new API. A new route. But this is wrong because we have API here. We don't need API here. We can just simply do this, right? Because the reason why we can do this is because in our config, so if I was to go to server, and if I was to look at my configuration, in my config, you can see that what we're doing for the routes is I'm prefixing it here with API, right? So the prefix is here already. We don't have to put it in. So when it goes to my index router, if I go back to my router here, then you can see that we don't need to put that because the assumption is when we come here, it's just API already. Okay? Wonderful. So this is this one, and what this one is, it get movie by ID is exactly right. That's what this kind of does. A little bit of documentation, and now we're ready to test it. Okay, so how do we test this? Postman, right? So let's do that. So I'll bring up Postman, and let's do that. So let's just use Postman here, right? Now we had a problem with this last time, and it asked you to download a version of Postman. I'm just going to sign in, right? So it says, here it is, my session expired, this is who I am, and here's my password. And I can sign in. And if everything goes well, I'm going to have my last thing we did, right? Which is our workspaces. And the workspace we created was this one, right? And here, what I want to do is I want to test for localhost 3000. I could do that. And then it's going to tell me when I do this, if I just did something like, again, this is just review from last week. So if I do something like localhost 3000, right? And I put one of those, it's going to say, hey, this is pretty cool, but you need to really download the desktop agent because otherwise this is only local and I'm on a website, right? Now, how can I test? What if I wanted to test my this thing right here? What if I tested this thing? If I had this is a link, and if I took this, right, and I went to Postman and put that in there, that's the thing I just deployed on render, then that's a different thing. That should work with our web-based Postman, right? Because what this is going to do, it's going to send the request to render. By now it could have spun down, by the way. It spins down pretty quick. Like the way to test it is if I refresh and I don't get anything here, right, then that's bad. So if I press enter and if it's spinning like this, see how it's spinning right here? That means it already spun down, my friends. And if I click this little button here, you can show pretty print that's built into Chrome, and it'll show you what it looks like in a pretty fashion as opposed to that really ugly way, which is a compressed, kind of JSON version right here. So until this spins up, I wanted to show you this, it's going to be like cycling. It's going to say could not send request because it timed out. That's what it did, all right? And give it a second, and once this finishes spinning up, now it's spun up. You can see that that's okay. If I refresh, you can see that it actually worked. And now if I go back here and if I just do it again, so I send that again, then it should just work immediately, right? And there it is. There's me working immediately with the stuff online. But we don't want to do it online right now. We want to do it locally because we're testing locally. So we're just going to close this off for now. And yeah, we'll leave. And what I want to do is here in Postman, like I've downloaded the Postman app for Windows. Again, you've done it for the Mac as well last week. So what I did was I didn't take marks off for in-class exercise 3, but some people did not show me Postman. They're like, hey, look, I can go online and blah, blah. I don't want you to do online going forward. I want you to show me your API with Postman, okay? Because Postman, we can make specific requests, especially when we get to do things with security, right? So we want to make sure that we have a good that Postman is working for us, because it's going to help us make those complicated requests and so on. And it's sometimes easier to do this instead of doing it on browser. If you want to show me browser too, it's fine. But what I'm asking now, why is it taking so long? My system is slow. Yours might have already worked. Don't worry about it. But we need Postman today because, and locally, because if we don't do it locally, then we won't be able to put in a request for ID. And so I'll show you what to do here in a second when my thing finally updates. Are you with me, by the way? Are you guys okay? You guys know what I'm doing and you're following along? No problem. Anyone have any questions before we move on? Hopefully you'll be okay. All right, so again, I want to do the same thing. I want to click on plus, right, which gives me a request. And now I can do localhost. So I can do something like localhost 3000/API. And now it'll request locally, and it'll recover my stuff. Here it is. But what I want to get is, I only have one movie up on Atlas, right? I want to grab this ID. This is the ID that I want to search for. And now I want to make a new request. So I'm going to copy this ID, Control C, go to a new request, and now put that in there. So I'll do the same thing, localhost 3000/API/ and then the ID, which is this. That's how it should work. And if I kind of enter, then if we know it worked, it's going to say true, and then one movie retrieved and displayed. Okay? You can also test this, because it's just a GET request. You can also test this thing locally on your browser. So if you went to your browser, because it's only a GET request, here it is. So if I was to go to localhost, this one right here, and put that in, then if I press enter, it's going to say success again. And this is the key: one movie retrieved and displayed. Only one, because we retrieved this one. There's only one, right? But we found the movie by ID, which is pretty good. All right, so that proves out that this is working. Let's continue. And the way to do this, of course, is going back to here, and I'm going to put this up on GitHub. So we're going to say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say added the new root, right? So, and this is like my the endpoint that we added was kind of like a /API/ID route, and we'll call this endpoint, right? There's my thing, right? And then git push. This will push both commits, the previous one and this one, together to GitHub, right? And when I'm done pushing, there it is, we can check to see what happened. And again, this GitHub is only for not the API, not this site, but actually it went to here to ICEs for ICE4. So if I look at ICE4, you can see that is the thing we changed. There it is. And we just updated that, and it'll show you the files that have changed here as well. Okay, so here's the one that we changed in server. And we can see that in server we changed inside of config. This is where this is. But the main thing that changed was in controllers, right? That's when that changed, and routes changed for this commit here. So we have 2 more commits. Okay, so that is what we did there, and we're good. We're going to continue now with the next one. So now that we've added this one, we know the process, right? And we know this is working locally. I'm not going to push it remotely yet, okay? So, what I mean by remote means on render. I'm not going to push all this on render. First, we're going to do everything and then we'll copy paste it into the other thing, and we'll be done. The other thing means the other repo. All right, so let's back to controllers. So back to controllers, I want to go to here, and we've added our controller for displaying movie by ID, right? And the next piece I want to do is I want to add a new movie. How do I add movies? Adding movies is tough. And we're going to talk about the problem here with adding a movie, right? I actually talked about it inside of our PowerPoint. And I want whether it's on a web form or whether it's in iOS or Android, you have to put in the list of your favorite actors, or the actors list, right? It's not going to give you separate lines because how many actors could there be? There might be 10 actors in that movie. They're going to give you 10 lines dynamically? Most likely not, right? They're going to give you one line where you can put actors separated by commas, right? So you might have, like, for Star Wars, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and other people that you want to put in there for Star Wars, let's say. So then what we need to do is parse that and create an array when we're back on the server. But before we get to this, what if, here's another problem we might have. What if, and I forgot to do this, let's go back to Postman. Let's see what happens when I take away a part of my ID. What happens to my server? So if I take away part of my ID, let's say I just take away the last character from my ID and press enter and I send the request out, what happens to my server? It's like sending forever. And what happens to my server, if I go back to my server, just to take a look here, and I go to here, to NodeMon, right? My server's crashed. I just crashed my server in 2 seconds, not even. And here's something, it says cast to object ID failed for value, blah, 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 because it's looking for a valid ID. That's a big problem, my friends. If someone does this and your server crashes, I mean, my server's down, guys. That's a simple thing a thing that happened where I'm looking for something by ID and it's just dead, right? So what's a fix for this? Before we go into the other fixes, this is something we have to fix. What is a fix for this? Anybody? Because it's a serious issue, like a super serious issue. An idea of what to do? Especially some of the more experienced people out there. I know that you guys are probably watching this remotely and saying, Tom, tell us what the problem is. Well, think about what I'm asking, right? I'm getting something by ID, and if by chance I gave the wrong ID, right, and that's because the route tells it to do that, then I'm kind of in trouble, right, if I give the wrong ID. I'm looking for, something, and I'm looking for, let's say, a movie by ID, and the ID that I'm getting is bad, right? So it's because the ID that I got is coming in, and that's a problem, okay? So what about if I don't find it? That would be a real issue, right? A real issue. And so we can test for it, but the problem is that it's taking that ID, and it's like, well, that's really not an ID, right? That's not really the ID that we're sending it. So let's do some changes here to try some stuff out, okay? So instead of an ID, what if I just put in, like what we had earlier, what if I just put in here ID, like this? What would happen then? Is that going to change anything? So let's save that, and then let's see what this does. If I just put the ID in there, right? And when we do that, of course, the server bounces back, because as soon as we make a change, it restarts the server. That's what it does, right? And when it restarts the server, it goes back out to MongoDB Atlas, and we're good to go. That's what this NodeMon stuff does, right? Wonderful. So it restarted the server and everything else. Next part is, well, let's test it again. So I'm going to go back to, Postman. Here's Postman. And let's just send it out again, right? So let's see if this crashes the server again. Notice that it's taking a long, long time, right? So this thing that takes a long, long time over and over again is clearly an issue, because if I go back to here, you can see that it actually crashed. It says reason, BSON error, input must be 24 character hex string, 12 byte uint 8 array, or an integer. That's what it must be. We're looking for 24 characters, a 24 character string. Okay. So we can test for that. We can say, well, if it's not a 24 character string, then it's an error, right? We can test that before, we get back to, to the user to say, you know what, Mr. User, you've given us an incorrect thing. It's going to fail, right? And it's going to fail because the ID you've given us is incorrect, okay? And so again, we want to be able to check it, right? Because we want to be able to make sure that the ID is valid, all right? So that's something that we want to do. And it's not for any other reason. It's not because as an example, I'm trying to make it difficult for you guys or anything like that. It's not about that. What it's about is that you've got to consider that if I'm looking for something by ID, that it's uncontrolled. The user can put in whatever ID they want, maybe by accident, when they're creating this stuff, and so we want to detect that it's at least 24 characters. Okay, so that's one little fix. It may not be the only fix. So let's go back. So that didn't fix it. That definitely is not the answer. So before we get here, we want to sanitize this ID, right? So we want to check to see if the ID is the way it is. And so let's do this. So we want to, again, we can say ensure that the ID is valid. So how do we do that, right? And so here is something that is, is something that is going to be, so Copilot says we should do something like this, okay? And of course this is wrong. Notice that it says return I'm getting a return statement that is like type response. My response is void, and I'm returning this, right? Which means I'm getting out of this function. I can't do this because my return type is void. I couldn't change my return type. I can make it so it's not void, and that I can get a res status code, because what this does, it says, and if I hover over, it tells you the error. It says type response any record is not assignable to type void, right? If I took this void away, if I said there's not this, and if I did this, then it's okay, because now this thing returns both things. And it says, here's a little funny underline, and the funny underline says, not all paths return a value. Okay, so sometimes we return a value and sometimes we don't. So what is the return type of my function now? It says either undefined or response string any. That's what it does, response string any or undefined. So we could specify this. If I take this, copy it, right, I could go here and say response string any or void. We can do that, right? Those are things we can do, right? And then if I was to specify that, now it doesn't give me that error anymore, like my weird error. However, going back to this again, it says success false, message, a valid ID is required. But this is like if we don't get an ID. But that's not really what the problem is it? If the ID length, the string length, because this is a string, right, is less than 24 characters. So we can say, well, if ID dot length is not equal to 24. It can't be even larger, by the way. It has to be exactly 24 characters. If it's not 24 characters, we return a status code of 400, which is basically going to say, that's an error. And status code 400, if we look at status codes, let's look them up. So if I go to status codes here, so if I say HTTP status codes, right, if we look that up, and then here we are. So there's our response status codes. And so there is client error responses 400 to 409, right, 499. And if I look down here, 400 is a bad request. That's correct, because we've made a bad request because we haven't put anything in there. The server cannot or will not process the request due to something that is perceived to be a client error, malformed request syntax, invalid request message framing, or deceptive request routing. So this is a good error. We can actually use this too for if they don't put the API in there. We won't do that right now. But I'm saying this is something that we want to do. We want to help the user say, hey, he did something wrong. Okay? Let's see if it works. So back to this. Again, this is before we do anything else, just fixing this problem. This is a problem. All right? So, okay, let's go back. And so we don't want it to crash. If the return statement, what it's going to do is it's going to basically say, it's going to skip out of this. It's not going to do all this stuff. This is definitely a way of doing that. The other way to not do this and not have a return statement, here, let's just undo that. So actually, sorry, let's redo that. Redo. 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 Control Y. Is not do a return statement, but rather let's res status, right? And we won't do this at all. This is another way of doing it. So I can kind of pull this into void again. We can do this. And then just do an else, like an if else. We can say if we're good, else, then if we're not good, or if we're not good, do this. If we are good, do this. So we can wrap our response here into something that looks like this, right? Where we can basically just say, if it's this, do this, else do this. It means we got a good ID. Okay, so something very simple like this. Okay, this is also valid. Let's see if this works. Okay, so we've got our API, we've reset everything. Let's go back to our, Postman, and then try that and see what it does. So we should get a positive response, like something like success false, message is valid ID is required to retrieve a movie, right? So we didn't put a valid ID in, and we get a message that. And if I do something else, like let's say for example I put something else, like the wrong ID, right? Now that's valid, but it's wrong. What is it going to give us then? So sent. Success true, one movie retrieved, but data null. This is bad. This is not what we wanted. The movie was not found, right? But we still got success true. So that's also incorrect, right? Because we're retrieving a movie and we haven't retrieved a movie. We did this wrong. So how do I fix this, guys? How do I fix this problem? Because it says success true, but it's not really success true, is it? Let's go back to that little controller that we wrote before I forget, right? That's why I went through and did this. So here is, okay, so find by ID, then there's data, right? But what about if we don't find a good ID, but it's not an error? So here is if the data was found. If data is valid, it's going to do this. If data is empty, we can do another if statement. So we can say something like, okay, well, if not data, right? Or actually, we can just do the positive first. We can say if data, then do this. Okay, so we have data. We can do this. Okay, let's try this out. So if data, we want to do this. Because we have data, right? What happens if we don't have data? Else, if we don't have data, then we want to do 404, right? Success false, movie not found, right? That's good. That's a good thing. If we can't find the movie, then we want to say, hey, something's wrong, okay? Here we're doing a catch error and we're doing a console error. And some people did some other things in here as well. But let's continue with this thing that we've got here. So ID length is not equal to 1224. We did this. Let's test this out and see if that's good too. So if I do a send, then we should get a false movie not found if we're good. And this is good response. We want to be able to respond. Problems. Let's talk about problems here for a second. Problem. Remember that the API client, which means that is going to be your the client that's on Android or iOS is expecting a certain type of object. It's expecting a success property, it's expecting a message property, and it's expecting a data property. And we're not giving it data here or here. So that is also wrong, right? We have to kind of figure out and pre-think, right, that, hey, what is it expecting me to give, right? So we might want to also add data, right? And the data property is going to be what in here, right? Because it's got to be null, like it says, right? That is correct. If I give it null, then we know that there's a data property that came back, but it came back null. If we don't give it a data property, this whole object is not right. The object we're sending back, success, this whole object here has three properties, right? It has, a success, a message, and data, right? Now we're filling that out, right? So same thing here. We want to kind of say that the data, right, is null because it's nothing, right? There's no data that we've kind of looped back on. Let's save this now, and let's do another API call with Postman to make sure that we're good. So let's send that, and let's see what we get now. Now we've got a problem. It says, sorry. It says that could not send request. We're trying to fix it, but now it says error, connect, error, it says refused. Okay, that means that we crashed the server again. Let's go back to this. And it says that, let me just redo here. It says that, okay, get, it says here's connected. This is what we did, right? It says get API CD, and it says 404, right? That's what we just did now. And then connected to MongoDB Atlas. So it kind of restarted Let's try that again. Maybe I bounced it a little bit too quickly. So let's try that again. Send. There we are. Success false. Message movie not found. Data null. Now why did I do that? Why did I go back and like look at it? There's another thing we can do instead of data being null. And I want you to think about what I should do instead of data being null. But do you think data null is a good response? Think about it. Think about data types, right? When you're Android or iOS. Do you think this is a proper response? Remember, I'm listening for 3 properties in an object. Success, message, and data. What is another thing we can return instead of null? My friends?
Empty array.
Empty
Array.
empty string is what we want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing. Because if we return an empty string, that's again saying, hey, there's nothing there, but it's matching the data type that we're going to be expecting all the time. Okay, as opposed to null. Null is another data type, right? It's not the same thing, right? So back to what we were doing. One more time. So again, really nice idea, Tom, but null may actually be worse than thing. So what we want to do is this, an empty an empty string. An empty string. And an empty string is actually better in many ways because again, what it's going to be doing, I'm just waiting for this to restart. What it's going to do is, if I send this request, it's going to come back. There we go. It's going to come back with an empty string, and it's the exact same data type that I'm getting back. Okay, now we can put this up on GitHub, because now we just made these changes. So I'm going to say git add dots, git commit -m, and we're going to say that fixed bug with ID. Git push. This is going to be the same problem we're going to encounter when we want to update something and we want to delete something. If I want to update or delete something, I need to provide an ID, a proper ID. And I could have the wrong ID, something misformed, or I could have an ID that's not found. I'm trying to delete something that doesn't exist. Now, usually that happens rare. It only happens when my programming, me as a programmer, has done something wrong and I'm not passing the entire ID across from the client, all right? Because right now we're just using the server. We want to start thinking about how this will impact the client. Okay, great. So we've done this part, and we need to comment it a little bit. So here, let's go here, and we're going to do one of these. Right, we're going to document this, and it's going to say something like, "Hey, we've got these 3 things, and then this function displays a single movie by ID in JSON format." Wonderful, love it. ChatGPT and Copilot, all the power when it comes to this stuff. All right, next. So now that we've got this, I want to add a new thing. And this new thing that I want to do is I want to be able to add a new movie. So again, I want to add a new movie. So this will be an export function. And I want to add movie. That's what it'll be called, right? It'll have a request object, right? A response object, and a next object, next function. It will also return void. And what I want to do is now here's what's happening. It's saying, let my new movie, this is what it's recommending, this is Copilot, let the new movie be the title, the year, the rating, and the actors. This is incorrect, right? It's incorrect because I need more than this, right? I need all of this and everything else that a movie is made of, right? When I make a new movie. So let's go back to our PowerPoint. This is why we refer to it. And now we have another problem, right? Which is this problem. This is the problem I was talking about. I'm going to get a movie, but the movie for my actors, directors, and genres are all going to be string arrays, right? But I'm not getting string arrays. I'm just giving it a big string. I need to create a string array before I come here. So I need a little utility function, and the utility function is called sanitize array. That's what I called it. You can call this whatever you like. I think I want to sanitize my array or create it, kind of, sometimes what I want to do is I want to split my string or whatever you want to call it. But the split function is going to happen before this. I want to kind of split it here, right? this is an idea. I want to improve this idea. This is kind of what I had last year. I want to kind of improve this to make it even better. All right. Let's think about this. First, I don't want to put it here. I don't want to add my sanitize function here. This controller is just for doing controller functions. So, great thing to do is going to go out to my project, and I want to make a brand new folder called util. Let's do that. So make a new folder, right? New folder. We'll call this util. Here's util. And inside my util folder, we're going to have utility functions. So I'm going to add in a new file that we're going to call the index.ts. So the index for the util, right? In my util function, I want to export a function called, right, sanitize, and it's, now this is sanitize string array. It's recommending stuff already for me. It knows what I want to do, right? Because this is kind of what I want to do. I want to sanitize my string. That's what I want to do. And it says sanitize string array. I could call it sanitize array like I did last time, right? Same thing, where I kind of put an array and convert it to a string or whatever. But it's almost like I want to split string and create array, something like that, right? So that's what I really want to do. So I want to kind of say split string and create array, right? So the input is going to be a string, right? And it can't just do this, because this is kind of what I want, right? Which is it's going to create my array. Let's take a look at my code here that I had and why I did this way. Okay, so before I would give it a unsanitized string, an unsanitized array, but the problem is the array that I'm getting, I was splitting beforehand. If you look at my code on thing, I was doing, hey, let's get genres and let's sanitize that array. I want to take my request.body.genres as a string. That's what I want to do. And I want to do the split thing here. This is what I want to do. I want to split here by comma, by a comma separated value. All right. So that's what I do there. But instead of doing it here, right, like I want to split this here, I just want to pass in this thing. I just want to pass in this thing to my function, my utility function, just that part. Okay, I think that's better than what I did last time. So that's fine. So back to this then. I want to get a string. There's my input string, and it's already giving me a string, whatever that is. And I want to split it by comma. So that's what I'm going to do. So this is going to return an array, right? So is this good enough? If I just did this, why don't I just do this? Input string split by this every single time. Why did I need, or do I need, something that looks like this sanitize function? Well, there's a couple things here, right? I don't just want to split it. I mean, this one, what it'll do is I'll take it and then I want to cut it up, right? So I've split it up, and you know, I want to return an array of strings. This one, I kind of here, what I did last time was I made an array that was empty. This is what this is. So there's an empty array right here, right? And my empty array, what it did was I pushed my my string, and also trimmed. This is something else I want to do. The reason why I want to trim is because sometimes I'll have an extra space. So it'll be like, you know, Tom space or comma space and then something else. And if I don't trim that space, what's going to happen is I'm going to have that extra space as part of my my string value. So that's why I did it this way. Okay. So nothing's wrong with doing that split, but I want to do it first and then continue with something like this. So I'm going to kind of copy this for a second here. This is not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. And I want to kind of come back to this, and I want to kind of do that. So I want to kind of say, well, no, I don't want to return here. I want to say that my input string is split, and I'm going to say that we'll say split string is equal to this input string that's split, right? Hey, there it is, okay? And then my sanitized array is going to be a new array of type string. Now notice I was explicit here because I said string array. I don't have to do that. I'm going to say something that looks like this, because what it'll do is this is using type inference. It'll know that it's a string array. Okay, that's the first thing that's going to happen. Then for unsanitized string, right? of my unsanitized array. I don't have my unsanitized array. I have my sanitized array object, right? Well, I have this, my split string. So this is my, actually what this split string is this is my unsanitized array. Unsanitized array, that's what that is. So then after I've got this, after I've got my unsanitized array, I'm going to create a new empty container. That's what this is. This creates create a new empty array container. That's what that is, right? This is what this line does, right? And then loop over everything, right? So this is like iterate over the unsanitized array and trim each string, because that is going to trim it up. And so I remove spaces from the end of the string, because sometimes people can enter more spaces, you know, or whatever, and then I just leave that stuff in here, okay? And that's important to do. So I split by comma, and then I sanitize it by removing any extraneous strings from the beginning or the end, right? Which is what that's what trim does. And if you kind of hover over that, it says removes the leading and trailing white spaces and line terminator characters from a string. You want to sanitize this thing, and so that's pretty good. So this is really sanitization. Even though I could have called it split string and create array, it's really sanitize. You know, that's what I'm really doing. This is what this sanitizing is doing. It's kind of creating this thing, you know. So I could call this, but I'm just going to call this sanitize array, because that's what that's doing. And I'm passing in a string, and it's going to convert it to an array. I could also say, you know, kind of make array, right? Make string array. That's also a valid name, like something like create string array. Yeah. There we go, create string array from my string, right? Could do that. But for now, again, like I said, I'm just going to call it sanitize array. Okay, so sanitize array is the function I'm going to use. I've exported it, so export sanitize array. There is no export default, just like I didn't have an export default here. I don't have an export default function. I'm exporting each individual function. And what I want to do is I want to sanitize array for genre, for all those things. And this is where we go back to our PowerPoint for saving time only and take a look at some of this. This is kind of what I want to do, but not the split. The split's happening inside the function. It's a little bit better, I think. We can do better than that, right? So let's go back to this and do that. So we'll start with genre. So let genre equal to, and again, we want to do this request.body.genre, but we want to use sanitize array. So we're going to say sanitize array request.body.genre. And the great thing is Visual Studio Code and Copilot figured out that I need to do something that looks like this, which is I need to import my sanitize array function from my utility folder, my util folder. That's what this does. I can have more than one, and I will this semester, will have more than one utility function that should be available to any place in my code, right, as opposed to just doing this. Okay, this is great. So now that I've done this, I don't just need genre, I also need, like it says here, directors, writers, and actors. Let's do that. So let directors equal to sanitize array, let actors equal to sanitize array, let writers equal to sanitize array. So now I've created these things first before I make my object that I'm going to add. I need to do this first. And again, this is in an effort to remove problems that I might have. You know, as an example, if the person was to enter some stuff, you know, in my form that was incorrect. So this is correct now. So I'm going to grab this little piece here from the PowerPoint slide deck to save time again, right? And you can see that what this is doing is creating a new movie, and it's taking the genre, directors, actors, and writers, which we sanitized, and sent it through. Okay, problems. What is the problems that I have? Well, we should cast this as a string. Here's something that we want to do, string lowercase. So this is something that's going to help us sanitize stuff, because we want to make sure that it's a string. What if, here's some things. What if there's no actors or directors or anything? What if a person doesn't enter those things? What happens now? Will my request object actually do anything, right? think about this, guys. I'm making a movie object, and if I don't pass any actors, like I just decide, but the user decides not to enter anything, right? Then what can happen? Well, I'm trying to cast the genre when genre itself could be empty. It could be nothing, right? It's almost like I need to test to see if genre exists, and if genre exists, then pass it or pass an empty string. That's what I need to do, right? And if I'm going to pass an empty string, should I really sanitize it? Do I need to make an array? The answer is yes. I need to make an array, and it's got to be completely empty, right? So that means that if I pass something that's not a string, now go back to my util function for a second. Let's think about this, right? I pass in an input string, and it doesn't have a comma separator, right? If I can't, it won't split. That's the first thing that won't happen. If I can't do it, that's okay. But what about if the input string isn't a string at all, right? I should check. And if it's not a string at all, I still want to do this, right? But I want to make a string. That's what I want to make a string. If somehow there's nothing, right, the unsanitized array is just going to be, well, something that looks like this, right? Bear with me, and you'll see what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so again, nice function, nice idea, but human error, user error. We're dealing with users now. This could be a problem, okay? Let's continue. So this is the first part, and the other part is I want to do a movie.create. I like that idea. So movie.create, and I want to create with my movie. That's what I want to do here. Here it is. And then when I create it, I'm going to say .then. I'm going to pass in the data object, and I'm going to say that if everything is okay, then success is true, the message is movie added, and the data is the data, right? Isn't that true? If I make my movie, then I have some data. Well, if you look here, we actually don't need that, right? Because we're not going to get anything. It's then, and there's a function. And so instead of doing it this way, where movie is data, we can say then we have a function where there is no data, right? And we can actually do it like this, if you think about it, because it's an arrow function. So then an arrow function with nothing, and then data can't be data, it's going to be the movie, right? So that's the changes. That's ChatGPT tried to help me, or sorry, Copilot. And then we want to do a catch where there's an error, and we're going to do something that looks like that. That's something we did before. Okay, so that is pretty good, right? We're all good here. And it looks like this is kind of something that we want. Let's make sure that we're spaced in properly. There we go. Why is it doing that? Because it doesn't like those things. Okay, and then we'll put that here and here. I don't know why I did that. But anyways, that's just trying auto format. All right, so, and then console will have to be pushed back too. There we go. And maybe my res, push that back there. All right, so there it is. There's the code, that we want to add in there. That's wonderful. That's good. Now we need, and I just talked about the problems. We're going to check those problems out in a second. I don't want to time out here. We have a lot to do, and I guess I underestimated how long this would take with conversation. But we're going to get to it. So the thing that we want to do here is I want to test this out, but we need a root again. So now that we made a controller, we're going to put this up on, or add a git commit, git add dot, git commit minus m. We're going to say added the, the add movie controller, add movie controller. Okay, that's what we did. And what we want to also do is we also want to make a route. So then go back to this, or an endpoint. Here's my endpoint. And then what will this look like? Well, we want to do that. So I'm going to say that, kind of like, instead of get movie by ID, I want to add movie, right? And then a router.get is going to be, now it says add, okay? So this is something that we have to consider, right? So there's add movie. Let me ask you this question for you guys now, all right? So we have a function, we have add movie, as an example, and The reason why this is not being picked up, if I kind of hover over and click onto it once, it says quick fix, and then it says update import controllers movie, which actually adds in add movie in here. Okay, so there's display movie list, display movie by ID, add movie. Now, what did I call it here in PowerPoint? Did I call it add movie? I did. Yay, good. So so we've got our list, but now we have an add endpoint, this add endpoint. So think about this. It's like /API/add, and then we're going to add a new movie. The only thing this thing does is add a movie. It doesn't add random stuff. So our API is kind of limited in what it can do because of our naming. Just letting you know, right? Other things I don't like here in our controller and our routers is that we have all these functions. We really don't need these functions, right? Instead of this, we can use an arrow function, which actually is more modern and looks nicer, right? We wanted to kind of do something that looks like this. So this is something that makes more sense to me to do. It looks like we're doing one lines, and this is kind of a neat way of doing it. Again, it's like saying it's a function without using the function keyword, right? Save. All right, and this is where we can test it now. Let's test it out and see how it works. So back to, to this, we want to add a new thing. Now here's something. Let's go back to actually one more time. Let's go back here. It should be, it's a post request, okay? A post request. So there's different kinds of requests we can make. We can make a post, a put, and a delete, all right? Different kinds of requests. Post request is something that is different than a get. We cannot do a post request on a URL in on the browser. We can't. We can do get requests, right? So this is where we need Postman now, right? We need to do it. So again, I want to make a new request, and I want in here, instead of a get, I want to choose post. That's what I want to put in here, and then we're going to say localhost 3000/API/add, and now we need to give it information for our request. So if you look at the body acts as our form, and if you put none, there's no form data at all, right? There's also form data, and you might be forgiven to think that this is the right place to put it. Actually, it's not. It's here under form URL encoded is the right place to put it. Now you can put each individual key and value pair in here. That's something you can do. Or if we had a form, we could actually copy paste it, right? Or if we had a, kind of some data from, if I go back to our file, we have a movie list that we may have included here, movie.json. Here's movie.json. And I want to grab all of this stuff right here and copy it, right? And I want to go back to my form here, and I just want to paste it and see what happens. And you can see that Postman is pretty good in that it kind of accepts all the data right here for us, right? Look at that. And I didn't have to do much. Just kind of copy pasted, and I copy pasted from the JSON data, and this is it. So this is my URL and blah, blah, blah. And now I'm ready to go with the send. Let's see what happens. I click send. And then if everything goes well, I should get a response. And the response is, meh, not going to happen. So what happened here? Why did my response fail? Right? This is an important thing to note. So remember what I sent. I sent off the matrix, right? The studio is Warner Brothers Pictures. The genre is action, sci-fi. The directors, writers, actors, year, length, short description, MPA rating, and critics rating. These were all things I sent across with a post request to localhost 300, right? 300, it should be 3000, and then click send. Let's try that again. There we go. Now we're good. So now what it did was it says, success is true, movie added. What data did I add? It showed me all the data that I added, and actually split everything nicely. Take a look at that. Director split, writer split, actor split nicely, year, length, all that stuff did everything beautifully, right? And if I go and do a retrieval now, if I go back to our API by itself, this first one, and if I just do a send, then we're going to see two movies, right? So we get the first one, and then here's the second one. So we know it added it in. Another way to try that is to go to here to localhost 3000 and press just API. So let's just go here and press API, and we can see now we got double the amount of data. Okay? This is good, but what if we don't add any data, right? Okay, so let's go back to that, and let's try and mess it up, because I want to add one more piece of data, right? So let's go back to Postman, and let's go back to the post request, right? And what I want to do, and this is why Postman is so good. It's such a good thing to use. So inside of directors, we're going to give nothing. We're going to kind of say inside of our this, we're just going to give nothing. And I want to add another one. Okay. So here's another one. And we're going to call this like the matrix. We'll call this the matrix wrong. Right? Matrix wrong. It's my matrix wrong thing. And let's see what happens. So say send. And let's see if it actually does the request. And it said true, movie added, right? And then it did this. It kind of added nothing, right? So one object with nothing, so it kind of worked. It didn't mess up somehow, right? Because we added something in there, right? We had a field that was in it. So the matrix wrong worked, all right? That's pretty cool. Okay, what happens if I don't do it this way? What happens if I do it again? So I added 2 movies. We're going to delete these movies later, all right? This is why we can do this. The matrix wrong 2, we're going to say. Matrix wrong 2. And instead of even having a directors, we'll just remove the directors thing altogether. We even have a directors thing. So the request.body.directors doesn't exist. All right, what happened if we did that? And I'm going to click send, and error. Please use API as a root prefix for your API requests. Wait, what? I did everything properly. How come I'm getting this weird error? Because, my friends, because if I go back to this and if I look at this, you're going to see that up here it gave us a 500, right? And a 500 is not the thing that we wanted, right? It's a 500 error not because it's a malformed request. And by the way, right, it tried to figure out what we wanted to do. We did a post request, right? But where did that come from? That response. So let's take a look here. So it kind of did this. It kind of said, It kind of said, well, I did this, right? And it didn't even come here. It didn't even come to this part. It actually went to my app.ts. So if I went to here, so if I go to my config, and it went to my app.ts, and then it came down here, and it gave me this error message down here. Error, please use API as a root prefix for your API request. Because it says error status 500. It was such a bad error because it didn't have everything it needed that it crapped out. It kind of said like, this is wrong, okay? Why? Because we tried to interpret something that was malformed. It didn't have a director, right? It didn't even have it at all. So if the director doesn't exist, what we need to give it is an empty string. And that'll solve things. It'll say like test to see if it exists, and if it doesn't, provide an empty string. So this is something that will go through, right? At least it'll give us an empty string if it doesn't exist. Now, it won't happen 9 times out of 10, but this error is useless for us. It doesn't mean anything, and it's actually wrong, right? It's a 404 of a type, whatever you want. Like we said, it's an error status 500, but actually it's a 404 type, right? All right, so let's do that. So let's go back to, actually it's really not, so maybe it's a 500. But let's go back and fix that problem. So again, I don't need this anymore. And display movie list is okay, and all this kind of stuff is okay, but I want to kind of say that genres, we want to try and pass it here, and it failed. It actually tried to sanitize something that doesn't exist. Like directors just does not exist. So if directors doesn't exist, what do we need to do? So we can make a ternary operator. We can say, okay, well, if request.body.genre, if it exists, okay, if it exists, then and only then sanitize the array. Otherwise, what do we want to do? We want to return an empty array, right? And that's kind of okay because this will give us an array, but it'll give us an array of strings, but really not an array of strings. So, I don't know if that's correct either, is it? Right? So we could do this, or maybe instead of this, maybe we sanitize an array that's empty. This is better, because if we did the other way, then we'd have an empty array, but not an empty array of strings. So this is what we want. Okay, so let's try this out. So we say, request.body.directors, right? Or this, and sanitize array again with this, right? And again, we can do that. We can say, check to see if request.body.actors exists. And if it does, then do this, else sanitize array with nothing. Or request.body.writers exists, then sanitize array, or sanitize array with nothing. So now I know it sounds like crazy what I'm trying to do here, but I want you to think about it, right? Because we're trying to figure out the errors before they occur, right? We don't want this thing to happen. So back to our postman now. Let's see if it craps out again. Let's say if I send the same thing with no director, and let's see what happens. So send, and now we get a request, and we're good. Then we get a request that's good, and we got matrix wrong too, but directors is nothing because we sanitized it before we went there. Pretty good. All right, pretty good. Now we're ready to put this up on GitHub. So back to this, we're going to say, any questions around this, by the way, where my methodology? I want to talk about this. Git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added, what should we call endpoint, which is what we did, right? The completed endpoint. So we're going to say added the endpoint, which is API /add endpoint. Okay. Any questions or comments at all? Would you do it differently? You know, there's like lots of ways to do this thing. All right, great. This is a great thing to do. That's awesome, right? And now we want to do the next one. And the next one is similar. Notice that what I put in here was the old code, which is sanitize array, except this time we're going to get an ID as well. So both problems. We're going to have an ID, and we're going to have to sanitize, and then we're going to create a new movie, right? And this is the update movie function. Okay, so let's fix that problem, right? So again, I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to make a brand new function. Oh, well, let's also comment this one. So let's use document this. And yes, it adds a new movie to the database, right? And now we're going to update the movie. So we're going to say, and it's trying to figure out what I want. Take a look at that, right? But I'm going to export function first. So export function, and we're going to call this update movie with a request object, a response object, and a next function. It's going to return void, and we want to do something that looks like both the things that we had, right? So there's my update function. So I kind of want to have the same thing we had before, which is up here where I searching by ID, right? Because I'm going to get this param ID thing. So the first thing is let's get ID. So we're going to do this part, right? And I want to copy this part there, because that part is important, because we know we're going to get an ID, right? We know we're getting ID now for the update, the movie ID. We're updating by ID, right? So instead of endpoint should be API /update /ID, right? That's what it should be. API /update /ID, right? And ensure that the ID is valid. So we're doing this. So valid ID is required to update a movie. That's what this is going to say here, right? And then else, what is that going to look like? What is that going to look like? Let's see if Copilot can figure it out, what we want. Ho-ho, look what it did for us. It did all this beautiful thing, right? Where it said, hey, we want to update all this kind of stuff. I want to take the genre and director, and this is good. And what's missing here is we're not just updating this, but we're also updating the ID. And then what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, if it's good, we're updated. We're almost good. I'm going to accept all this, but we're missing one piece that's critical here. This is all okay. We have to do still this. And what we also want to do is add in the ID itself. So if you look at here at the code, I also included this part, ID. Underscore ID is of type ID. This is important, right? So that's what we have to add in. So we're going to say underscore ID is of ID type. That's what was missing, right? Title, studio, genre, director, writer, actor, length, year, short description, MPA, and critics rating. It should be the exact same thing as this, but with the ID added in. So movie ID, title, studio, genre, directors, writers, actors, length, year, short description, MPA rating, and critics rating are all the things we're doing here. Okay, movie update 1. Movie update 1. I said the same thing, right? I said, well, we go here. Movie update 1 is what I want to do. We were filtering by ID that we want to update, and we want to pass in the movie to update, all right? Then we have a function, and the movie to update goes here. So this should actually be movie to update. In the PowerPoint, it's a little wrong. Sorry about that. Movie to update. Okay, that's where it should be, movie to update. So back to this then. Let's see if Copilot did it right. So here's movie. There's the movie. We call this movie, right? So we're going to rename this. We're going to rename symbol just to keep it on the up and up here. We're going to call this movie to update. Movie to update. So it kind of matches the PowerPoint a little bit, and you can see movie to update goes there. And now we're good. All right, so this is movie to update. Okay, and we know we can add a little bit of a documentation for this. Oops. How about we do this properly? All right, and this function updates a movie in the database. That's awesome. We did that. And now we need an endpoint. We need an endpoint. Let's test it out. So let's first add this in. So we'll say git add dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added update movie controller. And then the endpoint, I don't need the util anymore. The endpoint for the router is going to be here. And we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to say update movie. And now we can do a router.put, this is correct, where we do update ID and update movie. We know that update movie is the name that we want to use, right? And so we can check for a quick fix, which is just adding this, the import. There we go. Which adds the import to the controllers up here. You can see that updated the movie. And now we have something we can test, and we can test it with this, with Postman. Now, Postman, we need to have an ID for this, all right? So we can do that. So again, what I want to do with Postman is I want to kind of add another thing here, another request. We're going to make it so it's a put request type. This is important. And then what we want to do is we want to search for, go back here first, and search for a movie. I'm going to pull this down here. I think there's a way of hiding that. There we go. And we can search for a movie that we have. So let's just do a search. So we can search for some of these movies. So there's Empire Strikes Back, and there's The Matrix, and there's The Matrix Wrong. I want to add a director to The Matrix Wrong, and I need the ID for this first. So here's The Matrix Wrong. And I need to be able to do that by updating the ID of the movie, right? So here it is. And what I want to do is I want to grab all this stuff. Here's all this from here. And I want to go to this one. And I want to go to body. And I want to go to here. And then go to my first key and paste, which I got this now. This is not right. I got like some part of it, but it didn't work. And I got the other parts that's there, but it's not quite working. And that's what happens sometimes. You get some like weird thing like this, and that's not really what I wanted. So it didn't quite do what the other thing did, right? Because the other thing had the actual stuff there. And what I want to do is let's make a proper request first. So it's localhost 3000, and again /API/update. And then what we need is the ID, which we're going to get from here. There's the ID. So the ID comes from here. Right, that's the ID. And that ID is something that we're going to funnel over here after this. That's how it has to look. That's the ID that we want to update. And then let's just, by the way, bulk edit will also do this. This is kind of what it did with bulk edit. Not really what I wanted. Okay, so let's go back to key value edit list like this. And sometimes what we need to do is take that into like a file like Notepad. And if I kind of paste that into Notepad, so if I take the stuff from here, and let's grab this whole thing, copy it, and go back into Notepad and paste it, you'll see what we get. We get this. So now we have a comma separated list that's in Notepad and it's sanitized. I hate using that word, but it is true. I'm gonna grab all this stuff, right? And I don't need the V. This V is not necessary. I can come up to here, right? And that's what I need, up to there. And I copy it. And if I go back to localhost 3000 and put it into here in the URL body, so again, it's the XWWW form. I put it in there and press enter. We should get everything, right? Here's everything we have. The genre directors is empty, and we're going to put my name, Tom. You can put your name to try this out. ID is interesting because we want to take the ID, but we really don't need it because if you look back at our code, then our ID is going to be the ID that we get from the body, from the record. So we don't really need this piece. ID isn't required here. So back to Postman, we can just uncheck this. So we don't care about this. We only care about these things. And I'm updating it with Tom, right? So let's see that. If I click send now, let's see if it does the request. And success, it says movie updated. And now you can see under directors, Tom, that would be your name you put in there, is here, right? Yay, isn't that awesome? So we able to update and we kept everything else. It looks great, right? The same ID was used for the ID. There's the ID, right? And everything else the exact same. Wonderful. So now we've tested it out. We know the other stuff works because we've tested it already. So we're going to say git add dot git commit -m, and we'll say added the API slash update slash colon ID endpoint, right? Git push. Questions so far? One last one, and then I'll let you guys go. And then you have one thing you have to do that we haven't done together, okay? And then we'll talk about it. Okay, so there's git push, one thing, and then let's go here, and you can see that this is wonderful. This is good. We've done some good work here, and we figured out some problems together that's not on the PowerPoint that we wanted to figure out. And so now we have one more function to do, which is the delete function. Okay, so this is kind of easy. So we're going to say export, and we're going to say function, and here's delete movie. I like that. And the delete movie function is going to basically do the following thing. It needs to do the same thing, right? Which is it needs to figure out the ID length has to be correct. Otherwise, a valid ID is required to delete a movie. That's correct. The movie was going to be deleting one ID, and then we have to put the movie deleted, right, is here. Now for data, there's a couple things we can do to pass this in. We could pass in the ID of the movie being deleted here to show some kind of data for the movie that's been deleted, right? We can't really retrieve the movie here unless you really wanted to. You could do it. You could say like, I want to retrieve the movie as an example, and then pass the movie that we deleted out here into a thing. But I think what's really good is if we pass in the ID of the movie that we have here instead. So at least do this. Pass in the ID here. And so the ID itself is going to be the ID that we get from the parameters. So we say like, this is the movie that was deleted. This is the ID of the movie, right? And this is pretty good. Save. Actually, I did this like truly with just Copilot, right? And that's okay. Here we go. Copilot figured out this is what we wanted to do. And it was actually correct this time because it's looking at my patterns and it noticed that the ID is correct. And really, we're just going to copy paste it anyway. Movie delete one is what we're going to do. Now, let's go and see what we did here. When we did deletion, we did delete movie, and then delete 1. So it's the exact same thing we did here. There's our code. It's right here for you, right? And except that there's extra steps here for validation and sanitization. That's what this thing is. And it gives us back the message that we want. Wonderful. Now that we have this, let's add it to GitHub. So we'll say, git at dot, git commit -m, and we'll say added delete movie controller. There we go. Git push. So we push that one this time around. And then the next thing is in our index, we want to be able to do a delete movie. So we're going to say something like delete movie. And now we're going to use a router.delete, right? Because that is the proper thing. Delete by ID. That's what we're doing. Request, response, and next. The delete movie function is going to be here, right? So again, what we want to do is we want to use a quick fix, and it's going to be using this. And then what's going to happen is delete movies as. So these are all of our CRUD functions now. Save. Now let's test this out with Postman. So now that we made some bad movies, right? We had some movies we added in that were wrong. Let's delete the other matrix movies, right? So let's do 2 in a row. So we're going to say, okay, so we're going to go back to the original request and then do a send. And then we can see here that we have, Star Wars and the Matrix. But we want to get rid of this one, which is the Matrix Wrong with like no directors. Okay. There's also the Matrix Wrong 2 with me as a director. Both of these things need to be deleted. So I'm going to go here and grab this, copy it, and then I'm going to go to my requests, make a new request, and we're going to say that we're going to do a delete, and we're going to do localhost 3000 /API/delete/ the code of the movie, and then all we need to do is this and press send, and it should give us back that number. There it is. So I deleted it. Awesome. Let's do one more. Let's go here, and if I was to send, now it's going to have that movie deleted. You can see that that deleted that movie, and now we only have the Matrix Wrong 2, which is with me. So I'm going to grab this code, test it again, go back over here to the delete, and then just replace this ID here with a new one and click send, and we should see that that indeed also deleted the movie, right? And now if I go back to this request and I press send, now we're going to see only Star Wars and the Matrix, but nothing else. Yay, we did it. Excellent. So back to this, right? We can do the same thing, and then we'll say git commit -m, and we'll say added the API/delete/:ID endpoint. And now git push. My friends, we've done everything that I wanted you guys to do for your in-class exercise 4, except the last piece, which I'm going to leave to you. The last piece is I would take my information from here, right? I would take my information from in-class exercise 4, dump it, and overwrite everything that's inside of my API, this part. So don't delete the .git folder, leave that there, but delete all of this. That's what I recommend. Delete all of this, right? I mean, node modules you probably can leave. We didn't do any node module changes, so maybe you can just delete this, right? And then just copy paste the stuff from here and there, and then push it to GitHub. And when you push it to GitHub, it should update your render. Okay, that's for you to do. I'm going to leave that. I want you to explore that. There could be some errors and problems I want you to work out. Chances are it's not going to be a problem. But remember, if you do that, do not delete the .git folder. The .git folder, you want to add a new commit, and that commit is going to be, okay, I've added all my full CRUD. That's what you're going to say there. And then push it to GitHub. When you push it to GitHub, this other repository, not the ICEs, the API repository, it's connected to render. Render will do a new rebuild, and it should show you the new stuff. Then start testing on render. So on render, start using Postman and test on render. See if you can do the same things. Add a movie, delete a movie, update a movie, do all that stuff on render, and then show that to me in your demo. Okay? Questions around this, the process. This is full CRUD that we've done today. Again, the last piece is just for you to do. Any questions at all for the people that are online with me? Okay, guys, if there's no questions, thank you so much. Good luck on your assignment number 1. Remember, that's due on Sunday at midnight. And you have to do something similar to this from a push perspective, but you only need read functionality with your 20 movies. You don't need any of the other CRUD functions yet, okay? So you don't have to add them in. I'm only looking for read functionality for this week, all right? So if you want to put that up for assignment 1, you're good to go. I think you've got everything you need now to do assignment 1 properly. And I'm hoping you've enjoyed this class, and we'll see you guys next week on Thursday. Guys, take care. Thank you. And I'll stop recording now.